Welcome to the Melbourne Catholic website, whichever way you might be viewing this next chat, and very interesting one today. Sally Parnell is the acting CEO of Jesuit Social Services, a wonderful organisation across Australia, and most importantly, this was the State Budget week. So a very relevant time, Sally, to have a chat. Welcome.
Thanks, Shane.
Now, I've had a look at a lot of the pros and cons of the budget, and I thought you'd be a great person to hear from in terms of some critical areas that Jesuit Social Services works in. Prisons, youth justice, mental health, just to name a few. Firstly, what's your overview position on the budget? Have they done a good job?
Look, we congratulate the state government. We think they've made some progressive investments out of this state budget. There's some areas that we think are a bit underdone, but generally in terms of the health and welfare portfolios that we're most interested in terms of responding to people affected by disadvantage and young people with complex needs, etc. Yeah, we think there are some good investments there, but generally there's some other areas that we think are a bit underdone and a bit disappointed the government weren't a bit more bold in their choices of investment.
Well, let's explore those. Firstly, where are you giving them a tick?
Look, we're very pleased to hear about the expansion of the Navigator program, which is a innovative program to assist young people that have been disengaged from school for a number of months, 6 months or so, and it's designed to re-engage them back in school. And Jesuit Social Services were fortunate to run a pilot in that space over the last 18 months.
Yep.
And we're very pleased to hear that they've expanded that across the state. They've put over $40 million into that, which is fantastic.
That's wonderful, yes.
And for example, in the first 18 months of the pilot, we saw over 100 kids, and more than 50% of those are now re-engaged in education. And
Isn't that a great result?
We think that's a really good place to put the dollars.
Sure. Other gold stars?
Let me think. Again, we welcome the investment in mental health. We think probably, though, that the money has probably gone to the tertiary service end when we would like to have seen more investment down the other end, which is where we're involved, which is around more grassroots community engagement for young people with mental health issues. We know a lot of young people don't particularly identify as having a mental health issue, however will present when they're in need at emergency services, etc. We feel there is a lot more money that could be going into that front end of the system, which is about engagement and soft entry for young people into service systems.
Okay, so you're talking the real community services lingo there, and for the uninitiated like me, and for plenty of our audience, they won't perfectly get what you explained there. So can you give it to us in really practical terms why you think the money might have been better gone in at the community, grassroots level, more than, as you called it, the tertiary level?
Yeah, look, when I say tertiary level, I mean hospitals, GPs, that kind of investment, psychiatry, all of those services are needed. But I think what's needed on the ground is counselling for young people, engagement of young people, and often that engagement looks like activity, attending to their issues of trauma, attending to some of the high prevalence area disorders like depression and anxiety that if not addressed can lead into more serious mental health issues that can go on and on. So we feel getting in a bit earlier, and there's more numbers at that end, and we know that there's a lot of co-contributing factors around mental health. It might be to do with homelessness, it might be to do with childhood trauma, it might be to do with drug and alcohol issues, etc.
So is it too simplistic for me to say you're urging the government, and they haven't done it this time enough in what you've said, to get to the problems sooner?
Yes, I think so. I think that you can't shift resources always down to the tertiary end, but it would be nice to see the resources, starting to balance up a little bit more.
Oh, that's really interesting. Now, what about education generally? They've, sort of beaten their chests a bit that there's a lot of money going into education. From your point of view, are the dollars being spent in the right places?
Look, again, probably a similar theme to mental health, where we're pleased to see more money going into apprenticeships, traineeships, etc.
Yep.
But I think where there is less investment and probably needs to be more focus is around pathways into those courses, etc. for young people. We know that young people with complex needs and that have been out of school for a long time are not a walk-up start to these sorts of...
To get into these courses?
To get into TAFE.
Okay.
And so I think that what we see works is you need those, but you also need some early engagement and, again, soft entry points. And, again, we would see that as being around activity-based learning for young people that builds on their literacy and numeracy and some of the barriers that would stop them from getting to that first base.
So in a sense, it's arming the more disadvantaged with the credentials to get into what the government's so excited about.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And they do have some good programs around. I think they've certainly over the last few years put more money into that, to programs that we know are evidence-based and that work, and I think they could have been a bit more bold in that space.
Well put. Now, I know Jesuit Social Services pretty well, and I know that they are very proud of the work they do around people in prisons and coming out of prisons, and particularly in youth justice. Big, broad area. Just talk us through where the budget's gone there, again, where it's done well and where it's fallen short in your view.
Look, again, the government has put a lot of emphasis on this area in the budget. We know that keeping the community safe is a big ticket item, and we feel some disappointment, but there's in terms of quantum and proportion, there's been more money put into beds in custody, so prison activity, and less into more of that community-based interventions that we think are the ones that work. We think putting young people behind bars is regressive. We know that young people need to be held to account for their behaviour, and we don't shy away from that. But all the evidence all around the world says you need to get in earlier with young people. You need to provide pathways that are about diversion, rehabilitation, and addressing some of the underlying causes of offending, which go to the issues of which we're very familiar with, which are about disadvantage, around childhood trauma, and all the things that lead to young people getting into trouble in the first place. Yeah,
it's such an interesting area. The Herald Sun or the Neil Mitchells of this world, Daniel Andrews himself, will have you believe that they are getting it right. That if there's crime, we've got to punish and we've got to lock these people away. But you're very stridently providing almost the counter opinion to that.
Look, we think all the evidence about keeping communities safe is about investing in the underlying causes of offending. And we think that more investment in some of the more positive things, if we're talking about young people, we want young people to turn their lives around and get on a pathway that's much more healthy for them, that addresses some of those underlying causes. And a lot of those pathways are about employment, education and training, and having a positive view of their future.
Yep.
And we think that all the evidence points to investment in that kind of activity, more of addressing the underlying causes, probably for the younger ones, more of a welfare lens through which to address issues. It's not to shy away from addressing that young people need to be held to account.
Yeah, sure.
But we think that there's much more that could be done. Last year, I had the good fortune with Julie Edwards, the CEO, to travel to Europe, and some colleagues of mine also went to the States. And all the evidence over there is get in early and do some of these more positive things. The other thing we were disappointed about with this government is in our submission to the state budget, we were talking about raising the age of criminal responsibility to 14. Currently in Victoria, it's 10. and we think young people under 14 should be given a whole range of other responses which I've just talked about,
Yeah,
that
sure.
I think would be a much more effective investment than, locking young children up.
Sally Parnell is the acting CEO of Jesuit Social Services. Enormously effective organisation, I must say. One more question, Sally, if I may. What does the government say to you when you take the argument you just gave us and you say to them, world evidence is this, but you're doing that? What do they say to that? What's their response?
Well, I think there's two responses. I think that they hear us. The government itself has just done a big review into the youth justice system, and they've accepted all the recommendations in that report, which go to the heart of a lot of things that I was just talking about.
Sure.
It's not that the government aren't going there. I just don't think they're going there in the quantum that they need to.
I see.
And I think the message that you were talking about a moment ago around, if we believed what was said in the media around, crime being out of control, we don't think that's the case. Yes, there's some serious offending happening, but crime rates are going down in Victoria, and I think that the government is playing a double game there. And I think that, unfortunately, they're concerned about the issues in the media probably more than they are around evidence-based practice, and we'd like them to, next time around, to be focusing much more in that space and looking at the evidence and investing more heavily in that.
Well, if you've watched this chat on Melbourne Catholic today and you've been impressed with what Sally's got to say, and I think it would be very hard not to be, tell your friends. melbournecatholic.org.au, also available on many other social media platforms. Jesuit Social Services is the organisation that Sally represents. They do wonderful work right across the community, particularly at the more marginal ends, at the tough ends, at the margins, as they say. So, Sally, thanks for that really excellent overview of the budget, what's been good and what's been a bit short, and we thank you for your time.
Thanks, Shane.